welcome to the Penn State College of Medicine, CTSI, Now What, and all things research collaborative. We are a virtual ECHO program for research staff and investigators. We are delighted to have you all join us today. I see many familiar faces, and so thank you all for being here on this snowy morning. My name is Jessica Byler. I'm a member of the ECHO team, and I'll be starting us off with some brief announcements and introductions. Before describing our session format and what to expect from ECHO, I just wanted to share with all of you a little bit about why we decided to bring you this series. So we are all experienced in doing research at Penn State and recognize that research teams in our institution are doing really hard and diverse work in an ever-changing environment. We wanted to create a space for you to safely ask questions of colleagues, of experts, aid in navigating our system alongside research best practices, provide a place to share tips, new information, and to support each other. This series is for you, and we welcome feedback and suggestions. And with that, I am just going to share my screen for a minute and tell you a little bit about ECHO. Okay, so I'm just going to skip past our initial slides. So for those of you who are new to ECHO, ECHO is an educational model, and it's unlike a regular webinar where we just kind of pass on information. It's meant to be a dynamic learning community. So ECHO is based on a hub and spoke model. So the hub team, which you'll hear us refer to our expert panels as our hub team, those are the experts that are here today, and we'll introduce them to you in a few minutes. And then you are wonderful spoke participants. And the idea is that while the participants are able to learn from our expert hub team, you're also able to learn from each other. And sometimes the hub team can learn from you as well, as we're all bringing really valuable experience to these sessions. We will start our sessions with a 15-minute flash talk. That's the title of the sessions that you'll see in our emails, and that's brought to you by content experts. Then we'll move on to a case or a scenario presentation. So this is hopefully brought to us by one of our wonderful participants. James is kind enough to present a scenario for us today, but it really allows us to discuss real world problems together with experience. I will be reaching out to you and asking if anyone is willing to present something. It doesn't have to be super in-depth, and it can be something that happened in the past that maybe you struggled with or took a long time to find information about, or it could be something that you're working on now. It can be something with one of the regulatory offices or even a research participant. So our sessions will be broken up in this beautiful pie chart. We'll do introductions, we'll do our 15-minute flash talk, and then we'll have our case presentation and discussion. So we encourage all of you to participate in that. And so really what's expected, we know life happens, but we encourage you to come to as many sessions as possible. We really appreciate if you engage and participate in our sessions, and you can do that in the chat. You can unmute, whatever is the most comfortable for you. We will be asking for cases. That'll be me pesting you. And we do ask that you complete our evaluations because we do really look at those, and those are important to us. Okay, so now that that business is taken care of, I'm just going to go ahead and do our usual ECHO announcements. So please put your name and email in the chat for our record keeping. If you happen to be joining with someone else under the same kind of Zoom login, please include their name as well. Please stay muted unless you're speaking. Closed captioning is enabled if you would like to use it. Please remember, as always, no personally identifiable information is allowed when discussing research participants or patients. And we are recording the sessions for educational and quality improvement purposes, and we will share the slides and any materials after the session with all of you. And lastly, in the spirit of ECHO's All Teach, All Learn, we will be on a first name basis during our sessions. So today we will have our flash talk on the IRB impacts on study design, human subjects versus non-human subjects, and that will be presented by LJ Van Scoy and Erica Van Dyke, followed by IRB scenario discussion from James McNinch, and then our session will be facilitated by Abby Fisher. So during the presentation, please, or the case discussion, please feel free to put any questions in the chat. And if you happen to know any answers to questions, since it is all teach, all learn, feel free to answer them. So now I am going to ask our hub team to introduce themselves. And I am going to start with Abby, if you would like to say hello.
Good morning, everybody. I'm so excited that you've all joined us for our first session and that we're finally able to share what we've been working on for the past few months with all of you. So thank you for joining. I'm a research project manager with the Clinical and Translational Science Institute and Project ECHO here at the College of Medicine, and been here for almost 9 years. I can't believe it, but I'm really thrilled that you've all joined us today.
Thanks, Abby. Steve, would you like to say good morning?
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Steve Hicks. I'm an associate professor in pediatrics, general pediatrician and physician scientist, and I'm also the physician medical director of the Pediatric Research Resource Office.
Thanks, Steve. LJ, would you like to say good morning?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm LJ Van Scoy. I'm a pulmonary critical care physician. I do research in a variety of topics, mainly around end of life and communication. And we are so excited to have you all here. And I'm the Associate Director for Education and Workforce Development at CTSI.
Thanks, LJ. And last but not least, from our wonderful hub team, Erica, would you like to say hello?
Yes, good morning, everyone. If you can tell by my voice, I have a little bit of laryngitis at the moment. So Dr. Van Scoy is going to be covering my slides, but I'm going to be helping to answer some questions in the chat. I'm Dr. Van Scoy's program manager, and so I've worked with her now for almost 3 years, and I'm very happy to be here. So excited to have everyone here. And again, apologies, I won't be able to go over my slides with everyone, but thank you, LJ, for helping to cover.
Thanks, Erica. We wanted to make sure she got full credit for working with LJ
Totally. I always got your back.
Right, to do all of the slides. And I was remiss in not introducing some of my ECHO colleagues that are on the call helping. So I just wanted to let you know my wonderful colleague Jessie and maybe Melissa will be reaching out to you if we have any issues or just need some information from you. So thank them so much for their wonderful help. And we also have Jody from the IRB, who is our guest today. I don't know if you want to say hello, Jody. She's going to be making sure that all of our information is correct and that we are all doing the right thing per the IRB. So Jody, would you like to say good morning?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jody Matthew. I'm the Assistant Director for our Exempt and Expedited team. I've been with Penn State's IRB for over 25 years. And so we're happy to be a part of this and to get to know everybody and to help navigate this process.
Thanks so much, Jody. And please feel free to chat Jody or anyone in the chat, or she'll be available for questions. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Abby to get us started, and then LJ for the flash talk. So thank you all.
Thank you. All right. LJ, do you want to start with the slides? Okay. Thank you. LJ is going to share her screen and then we'll go right into the flash talk. So, oh, I love that background. Wish I was there.
Okay. Sorry, I had it all set up and then
it's all good. If you need help, I got you.
I got it. Hang on one second. Let me share the right thing.
I did want to mention, because of the weather and because we know kiddos are on school delays or virtual or whatever is happening. If you are in a situation where you need to take care of life before work, please feel free to do that. If you're joining us with your breakfast and your coffee, totally fine. This is a come as you are atmosphere. So thank you for being with us amongst the crazy weather this morning. Alrighty, if you want to go to the next slide. So that's our series. I'm just going to briefly go over the agenda. So as Jess already has done, give a series introduction. After I talk for a second, I'm going to turn things over to LJ to present our flash talk for today. So today we're focusing on human subjects research versus non-human subjects and what the differences between exempt and expedited studies are. And then we'll have a case or scenario discussion with James, who's graciously offered to present that to us. If you can go to the next one, please. And we just have a disclaimer. As Jess mentioned earlier, all of the information is created by us, for you by us as fellow researchers. We will share one-page handouts on the resources. And again, Jody's here to make sure that we do everything correctly. We'll be focused on the series itself, and the work that we're doing is primarily focused on human subjects research and using the Department of Health and Human Sciences definitions, not the FDA definitions of human subjects. And then as we mentioned, everything's created in collaboration with our experts at the IRBs. So we do have some resources here in the slides that we'll share. And then, as we mentioned, we'll have some one-pagers. So thank you all so much. I did want to mention one other really quick thing. This is part of a larger program, a larger initiative that's a revamp and a relaunch of what used to be called SMART. So there will be lots more information coming in the next few months about our initiatives, but I just wanted to let you know that this is part of a really exciting project that we're all working on. So with that, I will turn things over to LJ.
All right, thank you so much. I unfortunately cannot see faces because I'm presenting in presenter mode. So if you need to interrupt, please do it verbally. We want this to be really interactive, like we've talked about. Jody Matthew, I just want to put in one more plug for how wonderful she is. We have been working together for several years now in a lot of different initiatives. And I just want to say that she is wonderful and really helped us to hone this content and is not here to police anything, but just sort of make sure that, we have the right definitions because we are researchers, not content experts. So I just want to have a huge thanks to Jody for really putting in a lot of time to help us with this. So we're really going to talk about two things today. We're going to first talk about, and these, by the way, are things that we at CTSI, and when I was at QMMC, Qualitative Mixed Methods Core, these were the two most frequent questions and issues that we addressed. And so what we realized is that everyone sort of has the same questions, and we maybe get the answer to them and then we forget it a few weeks later. And so I can't tell you how many times I've had to relearn the same exact material. So that's sort of the nature of the beast. And you're not expected to be a content expert, but we're hoping that we have resources in addition to the investigator's manual that's put out with the IRB that's really going to help us to sort of have something that's sustainable so that we can be a little more knowledgeable ourselves. So the first question when we're talking about, are we doing human subjects research or are we doing something else? Are we doing QI? Are we doing non-human subjects research or different kinds of research? The first thing that you need to ask yourself is it research at all? And so when you go to the IRB, you're going to see this definition. So you see it's a systematic investigation designed to develop and contribute to generalizable knowledge. And Jody, by the way, knows that I love the IRB, that we are all good friends, but I'm going to make fun of some of their language because it's a little difficult for me sometimes to translate it. So I am going to ask the audience, what do you guys think that they mean by systematic? How do you interpret that term? And you can either put it in the chat or you can speak up.
Planned and protocolized.
Planned and protocolized. Okay, that's a good one. Defined process, following a process. Anybody else? A set of steps. Good. Structured. Research aims. All right. So the way that these are all great answers, and they're all similar, and also a little, the definition of this is a little interpretive, right? And that's what makes all of this information really tricky. But the official definition, and I'm going to have it in the next slide for you, is having a system, method, or plan. And so how you interpret that, you know, if you're using a systematic approach, using a methodology, whether it's research or not, or having a plan of how you're going to be using the information or the data or the stuff that you're looking at, that's systematic. So now let's do some examples. So can someone give me an example or think of an example or ask a question about an example of something that might be non-systematic? So most of us are researchers, right? So we have research aims and we're systematic, but what would an example of non-systematic be? And by the way, we're collecting all of your answers because we don't have all the answers to these, right? We want to make like examples so people can say, okay, here's what's systematic and here's what not systematic. So you're helping contribute to our resources that we're developing. An observation. Something ad hoc. Well, let's start with those two, individualized. So an observation is an observation. I'm going to toss this to Jody. Jody, is an observation systematic?
Well, so I'm going to give you the favorite phrase in the IRB world is it depends. And so those of you that I've worked with always know that I lead with that. And so I mean, an observation could be systematic because you may have things that you're going into specifically looking for in the way something is set up. And so you absolutely, one of the things that we see a lot of is, you know, ethnographers. And they're like, well, I just want to see lived experience, but you have a plan on what you're looking at and what you want to go in and see. And you're kind of documenting whether or not you do that. So systematic, and to be clear, we make fun of the federal government as well, because this is their definition. And we've asked them, what is systematic? What is generalizable? And, you know, they kind of look at you like you have three heads. So I think there are a lot of things that could be systematic that on the outside may not seem so. And so that's where the it depends comes in.
Great. Thank you. Heather, I see put one in the chat. A PI stumbles upon a person in the lobby and decides to talk to them about their medical services and get feedback. No IRB is done. Jody, what do you think about that one?
I would agree, because it's, you know, one person doesn't necessarily make generalizable. And so it's the whole definition. So maybe it is systematic, but is it generalizable? And I know we'll talk about generalizable here in a few seconds.
In a second, yeah. Great. Yeah, actually, I want to move on to the next one. If anyone has other thoughts, please throw them in. One example that I had come up with, and Jody, I want to make sure that you agree with this, is if you wanted to just sort of peek at random charts to get a sense of how often medication is used. So you're looking at charts, you have sort of a question, you want to know, you know, how is this medicine used and how often is it used? And you're just sort of sampling charts. Would you consider that to be non-systematic?
If you are looking at, so like, we're going to leave HIPAA out of this today,
Yeah,
but that could be a review preparatory to research, right? Like seeing, do I have enough to actually do a study and create a study and things like that. And so, and it also, you know, I think in the chart peaking, it's kind of like, what are we formulating the plan? So we don't have a plan yet on what we want to do. We just kind of want to see things, but we're not even talking about HIPAA today.
Right, right. Great. Thank you for that. Okay, let's go with generalizable now. So this one, in my view, is a little trickier. What does generalizable mean to all of you? Applies to the larger population, can be applied in a different context, wider audience, can easily apply to many people. Whoa, whoa, you guys are nailing it. Whoa, slow down. That's great. Okay, good, good. All of these definitions are very similar. Results from the sample represents the general interest of the population. Something another person might look at to influence their own practice. Absolutely great. So, well, actually, is that generalizable? So let's talk about what generalizable means. So the answer from the IRB is, and it's a term that I'm not in love with, but the answer to the IRB is it's universally applicable. So I'm going to show you now this slide, and this is where these definitions are. And we didn't go through all of them. We went through I think the key ones. Where's generalizable? Here it is, universally applicable. So I think the spirit of that universally applicable is exactly what you all have put in the chart, that the findings can be applied to other populations, people. It's not only specific to me or my university or my setting. What does everybody think about that? What questions do you have about that definition, if any?
Using that definition of universally applicable is not needed like a sampling methods to create, for example, randomized sampling methods that could be needed in order to be generalizable.
So you're sorry, ask the question one more time about the sample. I missed
Yes.
about the sample.
Yeah, utilizing the universally applicable definition to be generalizable. I'm just asking because when I did my master, in order to be generalizable to the population, you need to perform a sampling method. And there's a lot of them, randomized, different methods. The biostat know a little bit more about this. But in this case, this is the case that we need to, for example, the research, we need to do that methods, include that methods as a part of the research and as part of the IRB in order to be generalizable and have this definition of universally applicable.
Jody, I'm going to let you take that one.
So I think what you have to keep in mind is that's the IRB, and we kind of benchmarked with other institutions on how they define generalizable, because the government doesn't define generalizable for us. And so we've kind of tried to make that into layman's terms. And so it's the generalizable part that's in the federal definition. And so we've kind of tried to take that and say, and it's exactly the IRB's intention is exactly the definitions that everybody gave in there, right? You're taking it. So for example, we do surveys every year of our who our customers are, which are all of you. We do not have IRB approval for that because we're not looking to make it generalizable. We're looking to see what we're doing and how we can improve things we failed on, goals for the next year. We can still talk about it at a conference, because if you notice, that definition does not mention publication. And so when we look at that definition, and that's why those questions are in that order, is that if you get to the first one and it's not an investigation, stop. It's not research under 45 CFR 46, which is what we have to follow. So the first three could be yes, you could be creating knowledge. And so when the IRB does those surveys, we're creating knowledge for ourselves, but it's not generalizable. And so it's not research, so we don't have to apply. So all four of those questions have to be yes before it meets the definition of research that the IRB has to follow under the human subject regulations.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to call attention to the conversation in the chat, which is I was hoping that I wasn't going to be alone in this. And so that's part of what the Now What series is so that we don't all feel like we all have these crazy notions on our own. But I agree that the term, and Jody and I have talked about this a lot, the term universally is, I would say that no research is universally applicable. If you're studying, patients that, speak Spanish and you want to generalize it to other cultures or contexts, you're not going to be able to do that. Or if you want to study something where people are, white demographic from urban Harrisburg, you can't generalize that to, a white urban demographic from Philadelphia necessarily. So it's very difficult for the word universally. So how do we manage that? What do we all think? Like, how do you say that your work is, I guess our goal, right, is that our work is generalizable?
I think that's the goal, but I think it's actually kind of hard to do.
Yeah, I feel like I've never written a paper and not put in the limitation section, these results may not be generalizable to blank. Like just every single study you do has some limits to it.
Yeah. So I do. So yeah, I think this one's really tricky because I can't imagine ever answering, 100% yes or no. What about
And
some
I-
examples of?
Oh, sorry, LJ. I will say this is hard for the IRB as well. I will get submissions and I'm like, I don't think this meets the definition of research. And I will go back to the study team and say, here's the definition, here are the questions we have. Could you give me, because as the researcher, you all are the experts in your research. And so if you answer all those questions to me and I'm on the fence and you say yes, I'm reviewing it as human subject research, as long as it meets the definition of a human. Because I also want to make sure that if you need to be covered by IRB review, that you are, but it is challenging. We have a lot of discussions in my team's meetings about, is this research? Is this not research? And things like that. Human subjects is a little bit more straightforward, but research is a challenging one.
What do people do? Do you err on the side? Because like if you answer no to this, then you stop, right? And you're not researching, you don't need an IRB, and that's great. And that's easier for you. I tend to err on the side of always saying yes, because my hope is always that my findings can be shared with somebody else, even though not universally generalizable. What do others do? Do you err on the side of saying, well, it's not universally applicable, so it's not generalizable? And what does the IRB want us to err on the side of? Shalise in the chat says definitely. I assume you mean Shalise erring on the side of just saying that it's generalizable.
Yeah, because that's usually our goal, right?
Yeah.
I think
Jennifer
it could be
said.
generalizable to people's experiences as well. So people living in the same neighborhood, going to a certain convenience store. Like, I think people who are living maybe in the same environment, or like with smoking cessation, there's these medications that people could take, and overall, it helps people to stop smoking. So,
Great comment.
This is something that we actually struggled with when I sat on the IRB too, where, sometimes studies would be limited to English language, and there wasn't really a good reason why that was the case. And then we were wondering, as the IRB, what is our role in saying, if you limit your study to folks, that are English language folks, then are you actually truly gaining knowledge that is generalizable?
A great comment. So I do want to move us on because we have a lot of other things to debate, but this is a great one. And I wanted to spend a little time on it because I think it's like the very essence of like what stuff like can sometimes stop us. And if you have examples of studies or projects that you've done that you've said are not generalizable, can you throw them in the chat or ideas? Jody gave the example of the annual IRB survey that they do for performance, that's not considered generalizable. Examples that we had Erica and I had come up with would be like data about a course, feedback on a course, or data about quality improvement specifically for our intensive care unit or something like that. That's very specific to a certain unit and processes that happen locally. But if you have other examples, we would love to put them in there and circulate some thoughts about them later. All right, I'm going to keep going. So the next, that was just, is it research? That was the easy part, right? Or supposed to be. So now is it human subjects? And you would think that this would be easy, but it's also not. The definition by the IRB is that or I should say by the government, is that human subjects research is about a living individual about whom information is collected via an interaction or intervention and or privately identifiable data or biospecimens. So in other words, I kind of think about it as the reverse, and maybe that's helpful to other people as well. I don't know, but if I try to think about it, is it not human subjects research? So first you have to say, is it human subjects? And then is it research? So the human subjects part is a living individual. So it can't be someone who's deceased. So if you're looking at deceased records, that's not considered human records. I'm in the thing. You can look at the clock. Sorry, homeschool, really great. About whom the information. So the information that you're collecting, the interaction, the intervention, whatever is happening in your study, it has to be about an individual. It can't be an individual. It can't be about a group of people, right? It has to be about a certain individual, and that it's their information. That's what makes it human subjects. It's linked to that person, and whether it's their data or a specimen, that's what makes it human subjects. And then when you take it down to, okay, well, am I doing human subjects research? It's really the antithesis of everything we've been talking about. So it's not systematic, it's not generalizable, and I'm not interacting or intervening with individuals about whom their private information or biospecimens is getting collected. So thinking about it that way, is that helpful to people, or do others have different methods of thinking about human subjects or other ways to sort of translate this a little bit confusing language or questions?
I think the living subjects, the living individual part is kind of hard because for instance, if I want to do like a retrospective chart review systematically of all the patients who died from a certain infection, I don't think any journal would say that doesn't need IRB approval because all of the patients are deceased. So I think in actual practice, what IRBs and journals and researchers, we consider patients who've died to still, oh, okay. Sorry to,
No, it was perfect. We didn't even plant you. That was a great.
You know, I don't think anybody agrees that those are not research because those participants happen to have died.
So for the definition of a human subject, and I see what you're saying, it has to be about a living individual. And so one of the first questions that we ask when we're looking at the definition of a human subject is the information about a living individual? If it is not, we stop, because under 45 CFR 46, it's not a human subject. HIPAA regulations apply. You might have to have some kind of certificate for, review of deceased patient charts, and the IRB is the privacy board. But we would not go further then and say that this is a human subject under DHHS regulations. You could apply for a not human subject determination and have that formal determination from the IRB, but we wouldn't review it as human subject research if all of the charts are of deceased individuals. Where it starts getting tricky is if you're doing a retrospective chart review, some of them could be deceased, some of them could be living, and we're not sure yet. So then we would be saying, okay, this is human subject research because some of the individuals are still living. But if everybody is deceased, it would not meet that definition, and we wouldn't review it as human subject research.
So I didn't even need to say my next points on the slide because that's exactly the point we wanted to draw out. So thank you. I can't see who asked the question, but thank you. Does that make sense to everybody? And we're going to talk about journals in a second. So journals is different. You don't need to publish in a journal. You don't necessarily need an IRB approved protocol. You just need an IRB determination, right? So, and that's what the journals are looking for. So if you're doing deceased patient charts and everybody's deceased, the only thing you need to worry about is your HIPAA. You don't need to worry about an IRB. In fact, you'll get a non-human subjects determination. And like Jody just said, retrospective chart reviews, if someone's living in there, then yes, it is human subjects research.
Can I ask a question about that actually?
Yeah, please.
So I've noticed when I review papers, sometimes people will say the IRB determined this research to be exempt. And sometimes they will say this research is exempt according to whatever it is, the CFR, blah, 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 blah. Do you have to go, if it is very clearly exempt according to the NIH rules, do you have to have the IRB say that? Or can you just say, I'm doing what is very clearly exempt research and put that in your paper?
So Sarah, that's a good question. And that's sometimes where people are confused between not human subject research and exempt research. So when you look at the process of what the IRB has to go through to make those kinds of determinations is we start with, is it research? If it is, then we move on to human, is it a human subject? If it is, then we move on to, is Penn State as an institution engaged in that human subject research? That's a whole different topic. And then after that, it has to be human subject research in order for us to review it as an exemption determination, expedited, or full board. And so exempt means it's exempt from 45 CFR 46, the human subject regulations. Institutionally, and there's 6 categories that the government gives us. So your research has to meet one or more of those 6 categories in order for it to be exempt. So it's still human subject research. The IRB is the group at Penn State that makes that determination that a study is exempt from the federal regulations. It doesn't mean it's exempt from a review. It means it's exempt from the federal regulations. Not human subject research is where, if you're looking at those questions on the 594, like are showing on the slide, if you go through these human subject questions and you're like, yes, it's a living individual. Question number 2, no, I'm not interacting or intervening with anybody. Question number 3, no, I'm not getting data that is private, so it's publicly available. Question number 4, no, I'm not getting any identifiable information, so it's not a human subject. You can stop right there. You are not required to submit to us because we do not review, we're not responsible for research or for work that does not meet those definitions. If you need a formal determination, because maybe journals are now requiring it, which is annoying, right? They may want a documentation from a third party or from an IRB. We can give you that, but you have to submit that 594. What we can't do is we can't do retrospective and we can't, or retroactive. And so we don't require that you submit for a not human subject determination, but you can if you're not sure or if you need that official determination. And so that's that gray line of mission creep, right? We don't want to be responsible for reviewing things that are not human subject research.
So Jody, can I just stop us for a second? I just want to advance the slides. We're running out of time and we do need to get to our case. And a lot of what we're talking about is going to be on the next set of slides. So let me just kind of whiz us through, if you don't mind, because I want people to take, and thank you for the great information, because it's exactly sort of where we're heading with all of this. So the 594 is here, and we'll be sending out the links to all of these things. And sort of, we've already started to touch on this, but I think a really key takeaway here is that to the question, I think it was Sarah, about what journals are looking for. And you're right, the journals are looking for you to have gone to the IRB and gotten a determination. So we as researchers cannot determine that something is exempt. And that's a very common misconception, that if you think it's going to be exempt, then I don't need an IRB. That's not the case. I'm going to show you that in a different slide. And I'm sorry that I'm rushing a little bit. But if you have any questions about whether or not you're not human subjects or not, I highly recommend just going in and putting in that not human subjects determination. It's a very quick form. It's the 594. It is not a huge protocol. It is not all of the things that you think that you need, or that for a full protocol. And it's just better safe than sorry, because you cannot retroactively go back and get that. So for human subjects research, it's very important that you think about that. Now, for exemption, the IRB is the one that determines the exemption. So while you think that, so are there really journals required? Yes. So you need to have an IRB submitted, a 591 form submitted for the IRB to tell you, yes, you are exempt. And so I'm so sorry I have to do this, but I'm going to skip ahead to this right here. This takeaway right here. Exemption does not mean you don't need to submit an IRB. This is key. You need to submit a 591. That is absolutely required. And then when you get an exemption, you're like, great, I don't have to go back to the IRB. I am exempt from further regulation. So exemption does not mean I'm not doing research, I don't need an IRB. So the steps for exempt research, if you think that your research is exempt, which means that it's no more than minimal risk, which if you we can talk about minimal risk, that'll be in the one pager that we hand out. But if you think that you fall into one of the 6 exemption criteria, which is like super confusing, super long, couldn't even put it on a slide, very hard to work through. There is a good worksheet, the 312 that you'll see here on this slide, that helps you get through whether or not you fit into the one of the 6 exemption. I'll be honest, I almost always work with my team, and we just pick up the phone and go to bookings and call the IRB and say, here's what we're doing. We think it falls into category 42B, 691 or 5 or whatever it is, right? And then they help us think through it and go through that worksheet and then determine for sure whether or not it's going to be exempt or expedited. But the good news is that even if you're wrong, you haven't wasted your time, because for an exempt protocol and an expedited protocol, you complete the same form. It's still the 591. So you submit the 591, you get the determination back from the IRB, and then they tell you whether you are exempt or not. And that is different, of course, than what we talked about before and what we'll talk about in the case, that the not human subjects research, where you don't submit a 591, it's not human subjects, it's not fitting that definition of research. Does that make sense? I hope that clarifies a little bit some of the conversation. And then the last point that we wanted to just kind of draw out was about like, well, why do we care if you have to submit the 591 for exempt protocols anyway? Like why do I care if I'm exempt or expedited? Well, the good news is it's that further regulation, right? So for exempt protocols, you have to go through the whole rigmarole of the 591, but you don't need to go back to the IRB with every little modification, every time you add a team member, every time you want to tweak your recruitment materials. All of those things, you don't have to go back to them unless you're doing one of the things that need to be re-reviewed. And there's a list of those things, things like if you want to change your consent forms, or if you're changing your methods, or if you're changing the way you handle PHI, which is a HIPAA issue, right? Those things do need to go back even if you're exempt. And when they give you the exemption letter, it sort of explains all of that. So our big takeaway for this is that exempt doesn't mean exempt from IRB. It simply means exempt from further regulation. Any other questions on that?
I do have a question on this. For previous projects that I have done where I have submitted a 591 that I'm expecting is an exception, I also include other documents like the tools that I'm going to be using. Is that still required?
Yes.
Okay.
So we still need your data collection instruments. So for exempt research, because it's exempt from the regulations, we put in some flexibility. So a lot of times we don't review recruitment materials or consent forms at the exempt level. There are some exceptions to that, but we always need the data collection instruments and the variables and things like that, because that could help us determine also the review level or different subtypes of reviews at the exempt level.
And so the materials that we're going to send out to all of you guys is going to include a lot of these examples. And these are not comprehensive examples, because the thing that I have learned from putting this presentation together and working with Jody for so many years is that it's very difficult for the IRB to just say like, oh, I'm doing a survey study and I'm not using PHI. Is it exempt? It's like, well, maybe it depends, right? So the examples, right? The examples that we have on the slide and that we'll have in our handouts and whatnot are general, most of the time, but there are certain little things that you want to just like have your ears perked up for. So for example, sensitive information. So if you're collecting something that could make somebody criminally liable, problems with their insurance, their reputation, you want to think about what would happen if I accidentally, if the head of the IRB accidentally saw that I breached this data. What would happen? Would it be a really big deal? Did I, accidentally breach STD related diagnoses? Like that would be a big deal, right? But if I accidentally breach their opinion about an end of life conversation game, less big of a deal, right? Not sensitive. And so the content, that's why you need to complete that 591, is because the IRB needs to kind of take a look at the content so they can kind of make a determination for this limited IRB review for sensitive information. And so that's a huge part of why this whole like it depends thing really makes things difficult. We tried to give you some examples here. The last thing I just want to flash ahead to is about expedited research. And I kind of had to skip over the definition of minimal risk, which I think is pretty straightforward. But the reason that minimal risk matters is that because minimal risk means that you are either going to be exempt or expedited. So if you go above minimal risk, then you're going to have to go to a full board review, which isn't a bad thing. It's just not going to be that single designated ICU reviewer. So how do you know that? So it's clear if you're more than minimal risk, you bump up to full board. But what I always had questions about, and I'm sure you guys do too, and I'm sorry, you can put your questions in the chat. The expedited research is slightly more involved than exempt. And so the question I always go in and want to strangle someone about is like, well, what does more involved mean? Like, how do I know when I get bumped from exempt to expedited? And it's all about those 6 annoying categories in the 313. It always comes back to that, is if you don't click one of those boxes, then you're going to go up to your expedited. And that's not a bad thing. It's the same exact 591 protocol. The only difference between exempt and expedited is that anytime you want to make a change, you have to go to IRB. So, or to submit a modification. So any study team member, any word change in your recruitment documents, those kinds of things, they do have to go. So, you know, people often get a real tied in knots about whether they're exempt and expedited. It's really not a huge deal. And I just wanted to pull that point through. We have this other takeaway about PHI that it used to be that PHI was always expedited, and Jody, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not the case anymore. And so now we were trying to boil it down into a point for y'all, but basically we came up with, if you're collecting PHI, it still could be exempt, but you got to check with the IRB first, because there's all these like kind of things they ask you.
Yeah, a lot of things with, so like retrospective chart reviews, if you're just doing a chart review, it probably is expedited or exempt, I'm sorry, because the regulations when they were revised added a new category of exemption for specifically HIPAA. However, if you're taking that data and transferring it to University Park, that is not a covered entity, it can't be reviewed at the exempt level because it no longer falls under HIPAA once you transfer it to a non-covered entity. Sorry, news person Jeff Kane, or the mail person Jeff Kane. And so it can be complicated with it. So I'll go through some of these expedited examples that LJ threw up here. And some of it really is one little teeny tiny thing. If you're doing blood draws and you're doing blood draws more than 550 mLs in an 8-week period, you have to go full board. If you're adding an X-ray, it's automatically full board, because we get categories again for expedited that are different than the exempt categories, but your study has to meet one or more of those expedited categories. Even if it's minimal risk and it doesn't meet one or more of those expedited categories, it has to go full board. And so don't be scared of full board. We've done a lot of work on review timelines and things like that. So it's the same protocol. It's just, don't be afraid of hearing the words full board.
Thank you so much. And I apologize, my son's having some Zoom difficulty, so I had to like zoom out myself for a second. I'm going to hand it back over to Abby to move us along to our case. So James, if you want to unmute Abby, are you going to be able to do the introduction for James?
Yes, I sure will. So we're really thrilled. I know we could do a full session on every single one of these slides, so we really appreciate everybody's questions and chat. So I'm going to turn things over to James. So James is a fellow in our pulmonary and critical care division, and I'm just going to turn things over to James. He's going to present his scenario for all of you. We may have a little bit of discussion if we have time, and then he's going to share the actual outcome. So the purposes of this is really to enhance our learning and apply the topics that we learned today. So James, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks everybody. So just to give people an example of going through this process, most of my clinical work is in the medical ICU. And in 2013 and 2018, the Society for Critical Care Medicine released guidelines on sedation and pain control for intubated patients. And those interventions have been shown to decrease mortality for critically ill patients. So as someone who cares about lowering mortality, I was interested in examining how our medical ICU adheres or doesn't adhere to those guidelines. We all want to make changes to make things better, but before going and messing with things, I wanted to get data to look at our baseline, compare it to benchmarks, compare it to other quality indicators. And I wanted to do this in kind of a systematic way. So, one way people do this is chart audits, kind of by random, but I wanted to do sort of a broad data collection that was going to look at a bunch of indicators to see what the current state is and what we might target for an intervention. And I wanted that data to be, robust enough to serve as a foundation for if we wanted to do QI work to kind of look at a before and after state, and maybe thinking that if we did an intervention and it showed some changes, maybe in the future we could put this out as generalizable research. But for just getting the first line data, talking with Dr. Van Scoy, we decided to go through the IRB to talk about, is this a human subject? Is this research? And so we went through that process of going through the 594 form. Probably next slide, right? So, right, and so the approach that I took was doing a request to get the data for 1 month worth of intubated ICU patient charts. And I had the CTSI people work on building the REDCap database to look at that, and all of that needed an IRB determination.
Great. Thanks, James. So what we wanted to do is sort of toss this to the group to sort of work through it as if we were the IRB, which thank goodness we're not. But working through the steps that we talked about in the beginning of the talk. So the first question is it an investigation? And I'm wondering what folks think. And if you could put some thoughts in the chat. These are the 4 questions, by the way, in the HRP 594 that we're going to go through. Sarah says in the chat, yes. I'm actually going to take us back to the actual form. I think that might be a better way to do this, actually. So what do people think about these 4 questions? I'm seeing yes for it's an investigation. All right. Is it systematic? So why don't we type in investigation, yes, systematic, yes or no? That like put your answers to the questions here in the chat, or someone can. Systematic, yes. Systematic, yes. Yes, 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 no. Generalizable, no. Okay, so most people are saying that they think it's a systematic investigation designed for knowledge. What about knowledge? We didn't talk about knowledge, but is he looking for truth, facts, or information? Knowledge, yes, 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 yes. All right. Yes, with a question mark. Yep. All right. Jody, you're our expert. I'm going to pull us back to this. What are your official thoughts on James's study? Is it an investigation?
So it would be, so everybody who was saying yes, 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 and no, that's exactly where the IRB landed. And a lot of that had to do also with in the 594. So we look at, obviously we review these things, but, James answered those questions in the 594. And then also in section 3, where he's describing the project, he's very specific in saying, we're only doing QI on this. We have no intention of using this for research. We're just looking at our processes. And then he, goes into a little bit more detail on how he's gathering this information. And so we don't even need to, at this point, go into the definition of a human subject, because if it's not research, we can stop right there and give him his not human subject research determination. And so in order for us to get to those exempt, expedited, full board review levels, it has to meet the definition of both research and human subject. So it's not research, so we're done.
Great.
So what happens on the back end if he decides to publish what he finds? Now it became research.
Well, not necessarily, Sarah, because he can publish what he did and what he looked at and the QI processes and whether the institution was doing that. And so again, that definition of research doesn't mention publishing. And it just says, is it this systematic investigation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge? He has a determination from the IRB that says he's not doing human subject research. And so he's perfectly fine to publish. If he changes his study and adds more things that it now becomes research, that's a new submission. And then we would review it from that point forward. And so this is where that really super thin gray line of QI versus research comes into play. And so that's where we do really look to our researchers to say, hey, here's what we're looking to do with this information. And we're not looking to meet the definition of research.
So James, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience putting the 594 in and how that all went?
Yeah, because, even discussing the 594 with you, we had some, we even with you having done this many times, we weren't entirely clear about the answers to all of those questions. And so the solution was just to put in, short, clear paragraphs, what I was planning to do. And then it was a bit of a back and forth with the folks with the IRB. And I think the whole process from start to end took probably 2 weeks or so. And some of that was just me being slow to respond. So it wasn't onerous in any respect. And then it was just good to have that done as a baseline, to have that determination moving forward rather than trying to do it, afterward.
Yeah, so I think, to the discussion in the chat and in the presentation is that it really, if you're not sure, I really recommend just submitting that 594. I thought that James's study wasn't going to be research, but I just wanted to feel safe for him so that if he did find something really interesting that he wanted to publish as QI, then he would be free to do so. Because it would be, he would have that, yes, I went to the IRB, I told them what I was doing, here is my letter. So journals don't need an IRB approved protocol, they need an IRB determination letter. And whether that's saying he's good, it's not research, or whether he's saying it's exempt, or whether they're saying it was expedited or full board. They just need some communication from the IRB. So I just really encourage you guys, if you're not sure because of all these gray areas, and would love to hear how other people handle this because it is so tricky.
Yeah. And if anybody's typing anything in the chat, I would like to throw out there that we are definitely here to help. Our lives in the IRB live on the gray line of it. And so we really want to make sure that we're working with all of you as researchers and the experts in your research and us as the experts in the regulations, that we're here to help. We have a Find Your IRB Analyst page on our IRB website that's in those slides that we'll prevent or give to you all. But you can schedule an appointment with your IRB analyst and just talk this through and say, here's what I'd like to do. What big things do you think I have to worry about? What kinds of things would you be looking for? And to me, that's the sign of a great relationship between the IRB and our researchers, is that if a study teams feel comfortable calling us and reaching out with questions and for help and, just saying, this is what I'm thinking about, or I got a big grant and I need help figuring out where to start with human subjects, that's that's the most important thing to us, and we're doing our job because we're all on the same team, and that's getting your research started.
Thank you so much, Jody. I don't mean to interrupt or stop our wonderful conversation. Thank you all for your participation. We do really try to end on time on the hour. So I just want to thank everyone for attending today. Thank you for your engagement, all the discussion. Thank you for LJ and Erica and Jody for putting together just a fantastic presentation on really thick material for all of us to digest. You will receive an evaluation for this session via RedCap. Please answer those questions. We will look through those. It will help us see what your needs are for the future. We will see you again, hopefully on February 16th. LJ and Erica will also be presenting again, and that topic is we just got funded, now what? So hopefully that's of interest to all of you. Thank you. Have a wonderful snow day. Stay warm, and we appreciate all your time and attention. Please reach out to us with any questions. Bye, everyone.